Everyone to the monthly EFF-Austin Meetup. If you've never been here before, a little bit about us. EFF-Austin started back in the early 90s, around the same time that the Electronic Frontier Foundation itself got started. EFF-Austin was going to be the first chapter of this national organization dedicated to protecting digital rights, human rights on the internet, and educating law enforcement and lawmakers about what actually goes on in this weird techno space that everybody seems to be flocking to. So for 20 years or more, EFF has been lobbying in Congress, fighting for DMCA exemptions, educating the public on issues from net neutrality to privacy and security. We see ourselves as a sister organization here in Austin, figuring out how these global issues like the ubiquitous surveillance and the rise of cryptocurrency affect us on a local level too, and how we can better understand what's coming at us from the electronic frontier. So very happy to welcome Christopher Brown here tonight. He's former General Counsel at NetSpend, a sci-fi writer, has spent a lot of time thinking and working in this space. And he'll be presenting to us on the role of the blockchain in future technology. It's not necessarily related to cryptocurrency. But before we get started, I want to welcome, say it again for me, Mark.
Mark.
Yeah, Mark Powell from California. You are a self-described...
a hacker dissident poet.
Dissident poet.
Help everyone kill the internet.
Yes.
Okay.
To
evolve onto the next level, the next plateau.
To get us started with some poetry.
I just want to read a poem to introduce you guys. There's and girls. There's a blog post about Facebook, how they know you're in a relationship a week before you do. There's a graph, and they show that just who your friends are and how much you update your timeline, and that's terrifying to me. So I wrote a poem about it called "Please Don't Tell the Internet." And I just respectfully ask you to keep your phones down, even though this is a really good poem. Please don't tell the internet about our little scheme, that I love you, that I'm thinking about spending more time offline with you. Please don't tell the internet that you're important to me, where I was last night, how long we did it for. Please don't tell the internet, but somehow tell all your friends that we need each other, that we feel so alone. No matter how many eyeballs we've sewn onto these portrait pillows we keep in our pockets that softly beep at us every few minutes to let us know, I still got you, babe. Please don't tell on me to the internet. Tell the teacher, tell my parents, tell the doctor, call 911, tell every cop you know, all you know about me, about how I threw your phone away and how I changed all your passwords. Please don't tell the internet it was me. I want to be forgotten when paper goes away. I want to lose my permanent record. I don't want to live forever in some digital filing cabinet. I don't want the internet to know anything about me. I just want you and your mind that I love. What's left of it anyway, the part you haven't uploaded to your phone. I want to decay as your neurons decay. I want you to remember me, then forget me, then remember me again. I want to be lost so that you may find me again. And I don't want to be tracked and dissected and pinpointed and isolated. Please don't tell the internet where I am, that we are here together, hiding from it, under our blankets, offline. Please don't encourage the internet. Don't make eye contact. If you ignore it, the internet will stay under our beds, fall asleep in our closets, maybe get bored and find someone else to stalk. Please, I'm begging you, please don't tell the internet. Our scheme for survival depends on you keeping your mouth shut, swearing an oath to Omerta. Please don't narc me out, though it feels so good to tell your phone everything. I'm asking you nicely, please don't tell the internet. In fact, don't tell anybody. Just don't even speak. Just sit here in silence. The internet hates silence. So let's just be quiet together. And nobody's telling the internet nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's a good start. Chris, you ready?
Absolutely. Tough act to follow. Thank you. Thank y'all for coming out on kind of a cold night to talk about this arguably dry, but I think pretty interesting material. So I'm Chris Brown. I'm a lawyer here in town, a technology business lawyer. I've been doing that for 20 some years now, helping companies buy and sell stock in their companies, buy and sell the things that the companies make and all the other things that go with that. And I spent, I don't know, the past 8 years or so kind of deep into the nexus of financial services in the technology business, working downstairs in this building at NetSpend. And now I'm on my own working with a lot of different payments industry and kind of cutting edge digital currency startups and a lot of other kinds of mission-based startups. And as Stephen indicated, I'm also a lawyer, which means, or also a writer, which means I make stuff up, and combine that with being a lawyer and sort of having a certain mastery of BS. All of you should feel free to kind of call me out on anything you think I'm getting a little wrong here. I'm going to try to talk not so much in sort of a deep technical level about some of the things going on with virtual currency and the blockchain, but talk more about trying to sort of cover a whole lot of territory in an area where it's really hard, I think, for any one person to kind of keep up with everything that's going on. There are a lot of you here who are deeper into it on a day-to-day basis than I am. But sort of thinking about it, this is EFF, a group that I've been lucky to be involved with for more than a decade, on and off, and talking about it more from a cyber liberties point of view and sort of trying to get us all thinking about some of the civil liberties and cyber liberties implications of some of these things going on, which have immense potential to kind of transform our social and economic lives in a really positive way, but also have some, sort of grim implications. So we were talking about Satoshi earlier. This is kind of to me, the crux of the idea that's embedded in the original white paper from sort of a policy perspective. This idea of using the network and using kind of deep math to replace trust, which in transactions between two strangers online is provided normally by a trusted intermediary like a bank. And thinking about the ways in which this has implications sort of way beyond money, this idea of, think of Bitcoin as kind of a distributed trust network. And all of these other institutions that the legal system kind of articulates and controls and, plays different roles with, that rely on sort of these trusted intermediaries that are repositories of all of this power that are all sort of sitting there ready to be sort of disintermediated by innovations like the blockchain and other things that are analogous to it. Here's kind of a standard, network, sort of a map of different types of network forms. And you think most of the legal regimes that govern our economic lives are based on centralized authorities that provide essential sort of transactional verification and enforcement services. Those structures are historically derived. All property rights, all property sort of ultimately comes from the sovereign. If you start with real property, and if you go back to any abstract title for a piece of real property. And property, at least as any first-year law student knows, is this sort of bundle of rights: the rights to possess, the right to exploit, the right to sell something to another person, and so on. Sort of infinitely divisible into every kind of component you might want to articulate. And so the existing payment system, if you think of it from a network theory point of view, is kind of a pyramid of centralized networks that starts with those that are kind of run by the sovereign, that then insert themselves into the major banks, that then insert themselves into all of the third-party processors and program managers, and then down to the consumer, but really a kind of a very strong pyramid of control. If you think about contract law and the existing system whereby we enter into contracts with each other, it's already a much more sort of P2P kind of a system. Like, we all have the freedom to kind of directly contract with each other. We might need to go sort of seek the aid of the sovereign, of some centralized authority, of some judicial authority to try to enforce that contract. But it's sort of a system that's, if you can integrate it into software, into existing kind of telecommunications networks and figure out a way to do that, it's sort of ready-made for that sort of transport. So I don't think there's really anybody here that probably needs sort of too much Bitcoin 101. Bitcoin obviously establishes an open financial exchange network in which the transactional clearing and settlement that's normally done at kind of the back end of the payment system by the banks and the card associations and the big processors are done by network participants who are provided network incentives. And all of the transactions are recorded on a public ledger, the blockchain, this decentralized public ledger. And so the idea of the sort of open source decentralized public ledger is probably the most immediately disruptive aspect of Bitcoin, which is now sort of well into 5 years of deployment and maturation. And that distributed public ledger, that sort of substitution of this thing that's so deeply controlled by the centralized financial institutions, is the thing that's most threatening their dominance. And a key concept when you start thinking kind of beyond the pure digital or cryptocurrency idea is this idea of thinking of, a Bitcoin or another unit of digital currency as sort of like a digital token. Not necessarily as a store of value, but it's a kind of a certified thing that has a certain, encrypted quality, that has a certain ability to tie it to a particular proof of ownership. And the idea of that digital token tied into this distributed ledger as having a utility above and beyond some of these applications that the media seems so baffled about in terms of the existing, basic person-to-person medium of exchange. There are all sorts of other sort of ledger-based systems in our economic system and in our political system that are sort of ready to be disrupted, ready to be step back. I mean, financial services is an industry that, to a large extent, has not yet gone through a lot of the basic sort of reinvention, reengineering, efficiency finding, and disruption by network culture and by just basic sort of network technology that a lot of other industries started going through 20, 30 years ago. And so we look at things like title recording systems, real estate title, motor vehicles, all of these things that are currently dominated by centralized sovereign institutions, and some of which, like motor vehicles, are already being put on the network. Texas just this year implemented an electronic auto title system where all of the sort of the secured transactions in auto titles are all done electronically. You don't need that piece of paper anymore to sort of take into the dealership or to stamp as the lien holder to prove that you have the interest in the automobile. All of these transactions that are have to be notarized. The idea of somebody who's kind of performing a proof of identity, sort of a third party who comes in to certify that they verified the identity of each of these people. You can sort of take that example to more of the idea of like the German notary, the idea of in Germany, a notary public in a real estate transaction not only verifies who each person is, they actually go through the contract point by point and interrogate each of the parties to make sure they understand the contract that they're entering into, to sort of verify that. And as we'll talk about a little later, you think about that kind of idea in a more network context of the idea of like being able to have your own sort of software agent that's negotiating with the ClickWrap license agreement to try to kind of work through some of the terms and conditions, and I think the implications are interesting. Stock transfer ledgers. I mean, this is one where there are already people trying to do these things, trying to figure out ways to have instead of what you have like with a public company, you have a bank that serves as the third-party transfer agent. With a private company, the company maintaining its own ledger, systems that are rife with errors and ready, especially in the context of sort of distributed corporations, to be put on the network. But sort of more interesting to me are kind of deeper implications of cryptocurrency beyond just the idea of taking some of these ledgers and reinventing them. Professor Lessig, then at Harvard, now at Berkeley, I believe, in his book Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, coming at kind of early kind of boom era internet stuff from the perspective of a constitutional lawyer, articulated this very, I think, compelling and true aphorism that code is law. The idea that code is the sort of malleable law of cyberspace, that the codes that construct our networked lives are sort of like constitutions, and that when you're, sort of establishing the operating systems, or more broadly, the code-based operating environments for online life, as we've seen in the decade and a half since Lessig wrote his first book on this, code starts to substitute for the things that law does, certainly in its impact, and is much more amenable to modification by the users and by the kind of independent providers of goods and services than is law, which of course is promulgated through a very different and more centralized sort of process, however much we might try to argue otherwise. Thinking about constitutions as operating system. And so thinking about the idea of, from a legal perspective, from a sort of economic and social perspective about, what happens when you embody money in software? What happens when code is also money? When you embody money in software, how does that change the things that money does? And when you think about these cryptocurrency environments, you read like the media reports, and they're always sort of baffled about thinking about, be it Bitcoin or any other altcoin, about how is that ever going to, replace real money? And I think there's a fundamental sort of a shallowness of understanding, because it's not to the exclusion of sovereign currency. I mean, I take payment from clients in virtual currency, and it's sort of immediately transferable into sovereign currency. And, Dell decided last summer to begin accepting Bitcoin, and the same thing. They immediately turned it into sovereign currency. You can think of it as a kind of a financial software layer that sort of lets sovereign currency really function like virtual currency. It's sort of almost like a kind of application layer over the financial system, if you will. So to me, this idea of like programmable money is, in sort of the quantum of incremental instrumentality you have to money, which is kind of like a contract, right? I mean, money is sort of an embodiment of the simplest of contract, as sort of this exchange of value. The idea of, the money and the contract and the execution of the contract all becoming sort of the same thing. Thinking about money as a network, thinking about internet protocols of money, where, sending money from one person to another is very, very architecturally analogous to sending an email. And so, naturally as a lawyer, I'm sort of one of my biases and fascinations as a business lawyer who does contracts all day, every day, is this idea of smart contracts as a kind of a new working tool for socioeconomic life. Again, where the money of the contract and the execution of the contract are the same thing. The simple example I like to use is just like a sports bet. Imagine a bet between two people on the UT basketball game, where the money on the bet and the bet itself, and maybe with whatever point spread or other permutation you might want, are all embodied in a self-executing bit of code denominated in a particular virtual currency that then verifies through some pre-agreed upon scoreboard or whatever that's also networked who how the conditions were fulfilled, and then distributes the proceeds to the winner. And there's already all kinds of stuff going on like that with lottery systems and so on, and presumably all kinds of contracts, legal or illegal, going on between consenting adults, and that sort of concept is just as easily applicable to the most complex financial derivatives, where instead of the outcome of the UT basketball game, it's like the production of corn in the Canadian prairie this October or whatever, and all these kinds of complex hedging instruments. And when I go to these conferences with sort of lawyers and financial types talking about cryptocurrency stuff, there's all these guys from the big banks and investment banks in New York, because they're all sort of playing around and experimenting with this stuff. So other kinds of contracts that are sort of ready-made for kind of blockchain-based experimentation, any kind of contract that involves an escrow is sort of the same kind of thing, where you can have, you're entrusting funds under contract on certain conditions, like when a year has passed and there's been no claim, or when we're ready to close the real estate transaction, whatever, when sort of a basis for funds to be released. Any kind of a crowdfunding, where usually the crowdfundings are structured where, okay, here's my pitch, you send us the money or send it to the third-party crowdfunding platform, and we're going to hold it in escrow until we've met the crowdfunding conditions, usually which are we've raised X amount of money. The idea of smart stock, again, the sort of the stock transfer ledger that's sort of embedded in the corporation itself, trustless letters of credit, and most importantly, the idea of contracts that sort of can't be broken. Real world, contracts enforceable under common law or the laws of the states are really prone to a lot of human error that are based in, natural language. And they always run into problems of ambiguity that result in a scenario where basically you sign a contract, but really what you're doing is it's one stage in a kind of a never-ending negotiation until the parties involved are dead. And really, most contracts really don't have any sort of finality, and they're always subject to, whatever kind of weaseling the parties and the lawyers can get into. And they're certainly not self-enforcing. They're extremely hard and expensive to enforce, other than sort of if you have good business leverage. So the idea of contracts embodied in code that kind of have their rules set in advance by the parties, and there's sort of no turning back, unless maybe you could have some agreed upon mode to, for amending it, is sort of part of the code. It's really a very radically different paradigm. And so then if we incorporate into this sort of emerging, maybe somewhat speculative regime, the idea of smart property, and property assets that have some existence on the network, some network identity that can be tied into these cryptocurrency or distributed ledger platforms. The potential implications compound. Important to distinguish here between sort of obvious, sort of easy things to imagine with digital property, where it's very easy for digital networks to administer rights to digital property. One of the most interesting permutations of this I've seen recently is the idea of the tokenization of software. To do things like, for example, to take advantage of the first sale doctrine that exists with physical things. So, the idea that if when I sell a copy of a book, my exclusive copyright, one of my exclusive rights is to control the distribution. But once I sell that physical copy, my right to assert exclusivity over that distribution of the copyrighted work is extinguished. If I sell it to Stephen, Stephen can then sell it. He has the rights in that physical embodiment of my work. It's something that we haven't figured out a way to do with digital copies of things. And so people were talking about the tokenization to sort of, you could sell maybe for a slightly higher price, a kind of a tokenized piece of digital property that is sort of an alternative to BRM. But then, you get into physical property and the sort of the intersection with the real world, and that's where I think it starts to get a lot more interesting in many respects. There was an article last summer I saw about a woman getting in the car in Phoenix on an August day, 110-degree heat, trying to get her sick kid to the hospital, and the car wouldn't start because it had been sort of digitally disabled by these online systems. And if you go buy a new car now, you see that most new cars, and soon will be all new cars, are networked devices. And then the idea of driverless cars. I mean, it's pretty easy to imagine how capital is going to find ways to take advantage of these things and these sorts of networks to have the same kind of certitude about how it's going to be able to enforce its rights over property, as is the case with these sorts of self-executing contracts talking about. You can imagine, then you think about the Internet of Things implication, the idea of sort of the on the internet no one knows you're a refrigerator, the idea of remote foreclosure, the idea of all of these devices being networked into this kind of digital financial system, and then the idea of taking all of these we talked about Lessig and the idea of Constitution as code and code as law. Well, all of the kind of the legal entities that govern our business lives or our nonprofit lives are all similarly amenable to being embodied in sort of distributed ledger-based systems. Particularly if you have digital assets, the embodiment of the corporation or the corporation's other assets can be sort of articulated on the network. If you think about the charter of a corporation, your articles of incorporation, of your certificate of incorporation in Delaware, I mean, that's just a contract. It's a kind of a contract with the government, basically, that articulates all of the rights of the shareholders together with the statute that governs it. There are a lot of people doing really interesting experiments with the corporate charter as code, linked to control over assets, voting systems, and managerial power. A lot of the cryptocurrency startups are virtual corporations, or trying to experiment with that idea, or hybridizing it with kind of conventional ways of obtaining the limitation of liability that you're trying to get. And as you think about the idea of integrating voting systems into these kinds of charters, there's interesting potential to extend these to sort of broader political systems. So to kind of step back into some of the real world examples of the kinds of things going on in this space. Bitcoin 1.0, I mean, there's a huge ecosystem of things going on. We have a lot of folks here working in various Bitcoin deals. We have the Texas Bitcoin Conference coming up. When is it, Paul?
It's March 28th, 29th, here in just 40 days or so.
Right after South by, I guess.
Right, a week after South by Southwest.
So, I mean, there's a whole universe of companies of different sorts. These are just some examples. The sort of a lot of them are just basic, the wallets and exchanges. Coinbase and Circle, both sort of variations on the basic wallet, where you have repositories of virtual currency funds convertible into sovereign currency, and then morphing into kind of full-on exchanges. Coinbase, which is probably the biggest of the current wallet providers, certainly the one with the most venture money, just announced an exchange. And then we have the Winklevoss twins of the social network fame, who are doing an exchange-traded Bitcoin investment fund that they're going to try to publicly trade on NASDAQ. more into these kind of Bitcoin 2.0 and sort of beyond the blockchain sorts of companies. Ripple is one that I think is particularly interesting. It's the one that, like, when I go to Washington, the people in Washington are really particularly interested in it as a sort of the idea of something that's really focused on being a kind of a currency exchange platform that sort of will take any kind of currency you want and create a market with, in many cases, even actual sorts of market makers for the exchange of those things. So like people at Treasury are excited about this as a sort of a means of transnational currency exchange. And they're trying to build a kind of internet protocol of money, sort of P2P money transfer, as indicated earlier, analogous to email. Transactions are denominated in their own native cryptocurrency, XRP, which comes off their ledger, or other assets, whether it's dollars, euros, gold, or Southwest Air Miles. And interestingly, these guys have now been able to get plugged into the U.S. banking system, which is a particularly hard thing. I'm not getting much into kind of the deep regulatory stuff on this, but basically, in the current environment, U.S. banks are scared shitless of having anything to do with any kind of really cutting-edge fintech company. So even like Coinbase had a heck of a time getting a bank to hold its own money, not even its customers' funds. Ripple just announced deals about 2 months ago with two, FDIC insured, federally regulated financial institutions to support some of their cross-border cryptocurrency-based P2P, which is a pretty interesting thing. Another company that I think is really interesting, and that almost sort of science fictional when they're articulating their own visions, is Ethereum, which is doing more of what I was talking about with the idea of smart contracts, right? Sort of thinking of a decentralized cryptocurrency as a programming platform and a scripting language for digital contracts. Again, here it's there's the sort of the consideration of the contracts and the sort of the kind of the medium for the construction of the contracts is their own native cryptocurrency, which they call Ether. It encodes these, you get all sorts of, or designed to encode, it's sort of in early beta, I guess, right now, all sorts of advanced transactions directly into the blockchain. And the idea is to enable these sorts of self-enforcing contracts with, a plethora of examples of a joint savings account where you give another person some amount of control over the funds, and you sort of be able to set and control and modify the conditions, to sort of financial exchange markets and these decentralized autonomous organizations. Maybe less kind of conceptually exciting, but kind of interesting in a real world sense. It's sort of a real application of this, or talking about a real application of this. Overstock.com is kind of the biggest early merchant adopter of Bitcoin. The CEO and founder is a big proponent. And one of the things that they've been kicking around since last summer and invoked a lot of discussion, they're a publicly traded, SEC regulated company. They're talking about issuing crypto securities, trying to figure out how they could go about sort of moving their sort of ownership structure as this big, multi-million, or billion-dollar market cap company over onto the blockchain, where the blockchain performs all of the functions of the transfer agent. And the idea of how you go about embedding all of the rights of shareholders in code. Just quickly, a couple of them. This is a small one, but again, sort of interesting in terms of thinking about virtual corporations and so on. Tillit, and these are sort of New York-based lawyers and investment bankers trying to figure out how to take a lot of the things that deal lawyers and bankers do onto the blockchain, and sort of taking like your classic set of rights and obligations of shareholders and companies and startups that are taking third-party money, taking other people's money. So all of the normal rights of like in venture-backed companies, sort of the ways you encumber stock with rights of first refusal while you're private with rights of first offer and all of these things, and ways to ensure that all of those things are consistently and always enforced. Swarm is another interesting company. I think they're kind of morphing, but sort of started out as a blockchain-based crowdfunding platform, right? Or sort of a platform for people to build their own crowdfunding platforms. Ran into some securities law issues, as a lot of people have around crowdfunding, and is sort of morphing into distributed collaborative organization, is sort of another term for a DAO, built on the Ethereum platform. And these guys did a really interesting white paper that just came out that they did with the Berkman Center on Internet and Society at Harvard, about sort of distributed collaborative organizations and a lot of the legal issues, written in a sort of a layperson's way that I think is worth recommending. And one of the people who contributed to that was this French postdoc candidate named Primavera de Felippi, who also has has a really good talk out there you can look at. And this is the title of her talk, which is really a talk all about sort of Ethereum and the idea of kind of smart contracts and smart property and its implications, and freenet or skynet, and thinking about the kind of some of the different policy considerations. So talk briefly about those, and then maybe we can kind of open up for discussion. And people here who have their own businesses in the area can talk about it. So in terms of opportunities, I think there's great potential for these kinds of technologies and developments to provide individual and collective autonomy of a different sort. This idea of combining programmable money with smart contracts with the Internet of Things. I'm really intrigued by the idea of being able to have autonomous, kind of self-sufficient agents that are sort of empowered by a particular individual to kind of, act on their behalf on the network. And as more and more economic activity moves onto the network, and more of the activity is sort of acted out by kind of smart contracting entities, if you will. One of the things that I think is sort of a real problem from a lawyer's perspective with the existing sort of balance of power online is the kind of the tyranny of click-wrap license agreements. Something that my friend Cory Doctorow likes to talk about. And I think that if you can imagine a lot more people having sort of digital agents out there acting on their behalf in the negotiation of each of these transactions, as all this stuff evolves, there's a real opportunity to kind of break down some of that tyranny of click wraps, and people having the ability to kind of set contractual parameters for their activities along like, no, I'm not going to agree to this particular type of licensing term that's sort of inserting itself into what I do with this. Think of taking like basic kind of open source licensing concepts or philosophies and integrating them into your own online activity. And imagine a whole lot of people taking that approach and how that could really, I think, alter the balance of power. And then I think, community. This image here is one that when I think about kind of online, the online politics and all of the sort of utopian ideas from when I first got involved with web stuff in like 1994, and there was all this idea of how it was going to change democracy, which we're still waiting for. With this idea, this is the cover of the original edition of Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. The idea of the sovereign is being constructed from sort of all of the people participating in the society. And I think some of these, distributed ledger systems provide a really interesting platform for distributed governance. You think about it, and we talk about these just, sort of decentralized corporations and so on, where you're sort of derogating a lot more of the managerial power over the entity out to the shareholders, or out to other stakeholders. Increasingly, I'm working with people doing what are called public benefit corporations, where you're now allowed to have the effects your business has on other people, like the the people in a particular community where you're doing business, or the downstream impact of a particular environmental aspect of what you're doing. Integrate that into the corporate charter. The ability to sort of incorporate this kind of broader input into governance, and to have systems of governance that aren't really run by centralized authorities. The potential for a kind of distributed sovereignty. I think that we're going to see people experimenting with these things in the coming years. On the other hand, as was the discussion in this kind of Harvard talk, that the whole video, which is online, that Professor De Felippi did, this concern about the tyranny of code. So natural language-based systems of law that rely on centralized authorities to enforce them have the distinct advantage of being easy to break the laws when you want to, right? There are a lot of, like contracts. I mean, people break contracts all the time, and then sometimes knowing that they're going to be able to negotiate a particular outcome, and sort of the whole system is based on that. If you imagine in a kind of science fictional way, perhaps, but I think in a very real and meaningful way, an economy that's primarily based on rights embodied in unbreakable self-enforcing codes, that's a really different kind of legal system under which to live. And then if you think about extending that into kind of like the political system, the systems of governance, whether the place where you work, the corporation or whatever, you think about integrating this stuff with, sharing economy, the kind of Uberization of work that we're all dealing with, and the idea of, you're on a project by project, kind of each contract by contract, integrated into something where you can't break any of the rules. It's potentially Orwellian implications. And then the idea of just these digital wallets as, a fundamental premise of Bitcoin is the total anonymity that it can provide. But really, we're already seeing the state, with its post 9/11 reflexive angst about money laundering and being able to prevent what they view as bad guys from participating in the financial system, is doing a pretty good job of ensuring that it's the same kind of know your customer that exists for conventional bank accounts applies for all these Bitcoin wallet providers. And so you think about, you already see with smartphones and mobile payments, just kind of basic existing stuff, how it sort of turns your phone into a way for Google to try to get you to stop here, there's a special deal or whatever. And the more and more intelligence and networked activity integrated into your actual wallet or your money itself, the more creepy the implications. Rand Paul was giving a talk the other day about Bitcoin that got widely quoted, where he was expressing some skepticism about Bitcoin, because I guess he's kind of, maybe it's a gold standard thing or something, but a concern about, where's the asset behind it? And he was suggesting that, well, maybe what I'd be interested in would be like Wallcoin or something like that. Like where Walmart had its own cryptocurrency that's, backed by the assets of the corporation, which I tweeted about it, and it got all of this attention about, the idea of sort of company script. And I think that's right, because I think it sort of makes sense. There will be, there will certainly be like Citicoin, I think. All these big financial institutions, I expect to gravitate to this once they see like the potential of it, like as the material of contracts, right? As the material for derivatives, as the material for securities for their high net worth customers to invest in. And I can equally see, merchants and other kinds of businesses sort of having their own. Or imagine, your employer pays you in a kind of their own issued crypto that's sort of tied into the company, and then just sort of anonymity versus digital panopticon. So hopefully that is enough to kind of stimulate you all thinking about this stuff. As I indicated, there's a lot of technical depth we could go into, and that others would be more competent to go into. But I think what I wanted to do is stimulate you thinking about the kind of the longer term implications of these things, because I really do think this is coming. The digitization of money and the networking of most of the things that currently go on, on a much more offline way. So I'll open it up for discussion. We got a bunch of folks here doing blockchain-based businesses right now, and maybe you guys want to talk about it, kind of what you're doing and some more specific examples of the things you deal with, and however you want to proceed, Steve.
Yeah, so we do like kind of an open discussion format after the talk. First off, thank you, Chris. I definitely feel like we have a lot of material to digest there, bounce around. So if y'all want to present just real brief on Factum, say a few sentences.
Well, do you want questions or do you want?
However you want to.
It can be questions that I think. Let's make sure y'all have just a minute to say that, and then questions can be for Chris or for other folks in the room, and we'll just kind of freeform it after that.
Yeah, Paul, if you want to come up and give a brief
Sure.
pitch or whatever.
Factum is a project that I started with David Johnston, who manages the distributed applications, the DApps fund. He's a local entrepreneur, actually one of the biggest funds in the space, investing only in distributed applications. Factum, it intends to be a distributed autonomous application that runs on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. And unlike Ethereum or BitShares or Next or a lot of these other Bitcoin 2.0 technologies, Factum seeks to do practically nothing. The idea is to simply record data and secure it against the blockchain and making that data available to applications. And so as a strictly recording technology, it allows you can visualize it, create a book and place a record in that book and record it, place another record in the book and record it, place another record in the book and record it. You can't backdate a record. You can't modify a record that's been submitted to the protocol, and you can't delete a record. You have all the mitigation techniques that we know to man, like recording, oh, I made a mistake, record X should really be this. But you can't deny you made a mistake. And the problem with most of the record keeping that we do in this world is the fact that it's just a little too easy to just tweak it and hide the fact that we made a mistake, or suddenly realize, oh, if I tweak that record, I suddenly have more money, or I own that piece of property. And so it does suffer hugely from the fault so eloquently given by the poem earlier. Once you've said it, you can't unsay it, you can't be forgotten, and that sort of thing. But there's another way of looking at it, and that is this, for the first time in history, allows any individual anywhere in the world to tell their story, and then that history cannot be rewritten by the winners. Up until now, history's always been written by the winners. Now you have a chance to write your own story, to log your own belongings, to tell yourself, hold your records in a place where no one can deny that at least you said that was the situation. And so I don't know if it plays out best for Skynet, or if it plays out best for a utopian society where code works for us as opposed to against us. I don't know, but I do. The Factum is designed to create essentially pure blockchain technology that can be accessed and used by everybody. So that's what we're doing. We're located just up Mopac, and we have offices there. And there you go. We're a local Texas company.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
So we'll open it up for questions now for Chris, Paul, anyone else in the room. Just sort of back and forth.
don't know if you want to answer because it's just like a very specific legal question, but how much longer do you think a service will be legal, and is it even legal now? A simple service where, say you send Bitcoin to a particular address and you say what address you want Litecoin sent to. But if it's completely anonymous, doesn't require email or anything, it's just like you send the Bitcoin and then Litecoin comes out. Would that be already illegal based on the regulatory stance that you see, or is that going to shortly be? It seems like it will be illegal once the BIT license takes effect in New York, but what's the status now?
Well, it's it's pretty complicated because, as I was saying to these guys at the beginning, the financial services regulatory regime is based on like regulating centralized institutions that that then the system uses to kind of push down its fiat to everybody who's a participant in the system. So, and the model is basically there's, federal regulation of banks. The banks kind of push down the rules to everybody from MasterCard to the consumer who wants to participate in the system. And then the states regulate people who are doing money transfer. So in that example, if it's sort of two people just exchanging something that's not even necessarily money under whatever statute you're looking at, it's not really all that clear. Where it's a service being provided by somebody. Like I have this digital wallet service that's kind of like a bank account, depending on how you look at it and how the sun is hitting it. Then that entity, they're going to look at that entity and try to impose upon them to do all of the things that the state wants. So, verify your identity, make sure that the counterpart at the other end has its identity verified. That anti-money laundering, that's the number one concern of the financial services regulatory community. All this Patriot Act stuff. And then the kind of consumer protection issues and the safety and soundness issues. As more and more of kind of existing kind of Bitcoin 1.0 gets sort of domesticated, I don't think that there's going to be the potential for anonymity, except for people doing kind of next generation stuff that are staying a step ahead of the game. And I think that the transactional models are going to be deeply regulated. We already have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that's coming out with rules to govern prepaid cards, but they've actually written them in a way that applies to kind of every sort of kind of digital money imaginable that has any kind of a repository of funds. And so, for example, one of the basic premises of Bitcoin, going back to the original paper, the absolute finality of transactions, that it's not reversible, that the consumer doesn't have dispute rights, that would be rendered illegal. Everybody would have to comply with, Reg E, just like, a debit card. So I would say, on the one hand, there's going to be the ability to do that kind of stuff for a while, but it's going to get corralled further and further off into the margins.
So you don't think it's been corralled yet? They're not?
No, I think it's going on. I think if you're kind of trading digital chits that are your own inventions, those kinds of things, they're not money per se. And the way two people exchange money, if it's not in an otherwise illegal transaction, I don't think that's really regulated. It's sort of when there are intermediaries involved that the law starts to pay attention. That's my view. Paul?
Well, I do think that if you look at BitLicense, they regulate you at the point that you create your own individual chits and you start passing your tokens around.
Right.
And so if BitLicense were to pass as it is, the way I read it, it pretty much makes only banks able to play the role of exchanging and supplying Bitcoin to users. Any small institution that's not a bank, any like Circle and all these guys, they'll get edged out because the regulations are pretty painful.
Right.
And I sat in front of last week. Wait, what's today? Yeah, last week. I sat in front of on a panel with the Attorney General's office in New York, and just randomly this opportunity fell into my lap. And I told those guys, I said, the last thing you want to do as people who want to catch people who commit crimes. The last thing you want to do is get rid of this Bitcoin thing, because cash is completely anonymous. There's some estimates up as high as $300 billion worth of drug trade and illicit transactions in the US. The Department of Justice seizes $1.5 billion per year. That's not even a credit card fee. So AML and KYC is as effective as TSA for stopping terrorism. It's all theater. It isn't stopping anybody. Is ISIS running out of money? I mean, is Iran out of business? I mean, we do all this stuff to try to stop people we don't like. I mean, Mexican drug lords are doing pretty well, right? What is this doing? It's not stopping anything.
Yeah. So he's talking about with the bit license. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the New York Department of Financial Services. We don't really get into a lot of the law on this stuff, but New York Department of Financial Services is a money transmitter regulator, and they're trying to come up with rules to govern cryptocurrency-based businesses. And they're pretty draconian, and they try to make cryptocurrency providers behave like Western Union, just sort of oversimplify it, all right, and kind of follow the same sorts of rules. They're trying to figure out now, as they got a lot of industry pushback, how to create a kind of an entry level that sort of is like a little more user friendly for people in a startup phase. But they still don't, I don't think, regulate like individuals who are merely doing, and as on the one hand, this gets more domesticated, it gets more sort of concentrated in a few institutions that are providing sort of easy services. On the other hand, it provides the tools for individuals to just kind of do person-to-person negotiations denominated in whatever. And I think that's still going to be really hard to regulate. And because to Paul's point, I mean, the regulators are they're kind of chasing dinosaurs. And instead of thinking about ways like, okay, you're presented here with a technological platform that deeply enhances your ability to have visibility into what's going on in the system. If you have a public ledger of every transaction from the inception of the platform to today, if you can just figure out a way to sort of penetrate the kind of layer of anonymity there, you can kind of, it's a AML, financial crimes investigators fantasy. And I've always suggested to the regulator that when things like identity theft and ways of sort of verifying identity, that in fact they're often freaked out about how can you have like bank accounts or things like bank accounts with people that you don't see, and you don't get to like check their ID in person. And in fact, there are lots of ways to use data and use technology to achieve a much more reliable system, I think, than like the frat boy with the red tie at the bank kind of, interviewing you for 2 minutes, right?
Question in the back here.
So I'm a bit cryptocurrency new.
Yeah.
Don't know any, never used it, never really read too much about it. It's just to come tonight. I don't know if I'm the only one in the room.
Welcome. It's like AA.
But so several times been touching on the anonymity question, and I've never been able to wrap my head around.
It's straight up not anonymous.
Sorry?
Bitcoin is not anonymous.
Okay.
It's called pseudonymous, right?
Yeah.
So the thing about identity is, right, so at the end of the day, if there's always people involved, and there's, let's say there's a guy I arrange with him to paint my garage, right? I don't want to pay him in Bitcoin. I don't verify it in person that he painted my garage, and he wanted to defraud me, right? So he planned to take my money and not paint my garage. So there's a human element. Someone actually go look at the garage and see that it was painted, and then assert that it was true, but then there's another human involved or some other kind of assertion. So there's like, for me, there's like somewhere between the hardware and the software that, if anonymity is able to turn it into this Byzantine network of, sometimes I want to be able to go grab someone and put them in jail because they did the wrong thing with my contract. Sometimes it's a crime, not just fraud, or not just whatever. So is anonymity a thing that people actually focus on when they look at cryptocurrency as though it were cash, because I don't necessarily want that.
So you may be confused. So
I'm likely very confused. So.
The point is, it's a push-based system. So when you give someone your credit card number, you are giving them your password to pull money out of your account. And all we have is the rules of the system to stop them from pulling as much money out as they want to. Bitcoin is a push-based system. So you don't give them a password. You push the money out.
Yeah.
Well, you decide at some point to sign a transaction to give to them. And if you don't sign that transaction, then they can't take your money. And so, and that signature is something you never have to give to anybody.
Right.
And so,
But people do. They keep them online, right?
well, usually they trust them to generate a password, and the user often doesn't ever have it.
Sure. There's just massive fraud problems with Bitcoin, right? I mean,
There is, but everyone should remember, you treat it like cash. I mean, when you hand people a $10 bill, you don't expect to be empowered to take that $10 bill back later. So you just treat a Bitcoin the same way. If you pay the guy half when he quotes the job, you come back and you make sure he painted the garage, and then you pay him the other half, same as you would do with a cash deal. Yeah, so it's just all about how you use it.
So that part makes sense, but I was kind of going down the path where you were talking about the programmability of these things, right? So let's trust this number that's generated by someone. Someone can make a SOAP call somewhere and say,
Oh, you're talking
rest
about
call.
the Ethereum contract.
Well, yeah, kind of you talked about the programmability of money, and I was just trying to link
Right,
it
so
all
say
together.
you wanted to make a contract with that guy to paint your garage, like, and there was a smart contract out there that was like garage painting service, and
Right.
it holds your funds in escrow until some third-party verification of your garage being painted. Like, I don't know, you have a smart garage door or whatever, and it's like,
Usually-
I had paint on it.
Those are called oracles.
Then it releases the money to him once that happens.
You either call it an oracle, some way of determining that the garage was painted, or you do a 2 out of 3. And the 2 out of 3 works like this. You say there's somebody that you both trust, the garage painter and yourself, to judge if there's a dispute. If you agree the garage has been painted and he agrees that you painted the garage, you both sign the contract, you get the money, he gets the money. If you don't agree, then his only recourse is to go to that trusted party and say, well, look at the garage, it's painted. It's perfectly well painted, and I've addressed everything. And then that trusted third party agrees with the garage painter, he signs it, and the garage guy signs it, and gets it. Otherwise, he disagrees with the garage guy, and he tells the owner, I'm not gonna sign this, this transaction's dead, because he didn't paint your garage. And so
then they refund.
So there's and to the
So
right.
you have like a multi-sig transaction, basically.
But
But
in this case, there's still a human involved.
Sure.
Well, there's
But I'm
or it could be something else.
Obviously, the pattern applies.
In the case of garage painting, there has to be a human,
Right.
but if the contract was more something that could be verified programmatically.
Or a digital asset of some sort.
You may not even need to involve a human.
Right.
The trust is not in any one person to verify, it's in the network of participants to verify, which is more trustworthy, if not perfectly.
So is there a dichotomy between these kind of real world services and then this kind of generalized transfer of funds world? Because
Well, I mean, real world, you're going to end up with hybridizations of real and digital assets and identities and whatnot.
See, what you do today is interesting. You pay the guy with a credit card, and then you go and you look at the garage and you go, oh my gosh, this isn't painted well. So you call the credit card company and you say it wasn't painted. And the credit card company pulls the funds out of his account and sticks it back in your account. But did the credit card company go look at your garage?
Right.
No, they just kind of sort of, they don't have any time for that. They just kind of guess. And so what happens with the fraud on eBay or fraud with PayPal is you sell a good or service to someone, they get it, then they complain they didn't get it, and so then PayPal pulls the money out of your account. And you're left without the money and the product, and you have no recourse because the third party who's governing this really isn't paying any attention to anything. And so that's where digital money has an advantage because you can choose.
Wait, you're saying eBay there's no recourse, but eBay and PayPal do.
Well,
have
PayPal.
fraud, and PayPal have fraud departments. Like I just called someone fraud.
Yeah, but they almost always side
Netflix
with
was
the
double billing. Yeah, but there's no recourse.
They side with you're right, you're correct. They always, I mean, mostly side with the customer rather than the vendors. The vendors are always the odd man out. I mean, by default, pretty much, when there's a complaint.
Right. But so what's the recourse in the Bitcoin world if the transaction?
Well, the idea is, I mean, in a sort of smart contract world, is that you're going to be able to pre-program
Right.
the conditions of the satisfaction of your expectation under the contract. So in the example of the sports bet, it's really easy. This contract between two parties, here's the money, we agree, we're gonna go to the, whatever, scoreboard and pull down the data and sort of release the conditions. Now, if it's not paint my garage, but debug my new app or whatever, some kind of digital asset, there might be a way to agree upon, a sort of a testing protocol to verify that. And so your sort of ability to do that to me is a kind of a function of, can you imagine and agree upon these conditions? And it's going to start with simple things and build up to more complex things and increasingly make it less and less necessary to have human subjective judgment applied to determine whether the conditions have been fulfilled.
A question: who do you think is gonna be rated next? Or like the big Bitcoin companies? You think it's like Coinbase or like what are the companies that are?
I'm waiting for the time when like 3 Russian goons kidnap the 3 guys who have the actual access to where the repositories of all the private keys are.
Right.
This is when you go to these like lawyer conferences, they have these security guys, and they're all talking about, it's like more like the physical security of these companies is like the greatest vulnerability because they have these things that are like cash that they have to sort of store someplace. I don't know. Others would have a better idea of who's going to be attacked next, but I think you can be sure that there's going to be a lot more volatility. There's these kind of 4 stages of Bitcoin that like Fred Wilson and Union Ventures and others articulated, and it sort of starts with the kind of the crypto anarchist sort of libertarian phase, a very ideological kind of utopian phase, sort of the very early days, goes into the vice phase, which, these guys, the VCs like to argue we've passed out of. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think there's still plenty of life on the dark web. Then the speculative phase, which we've kind of been in, and maybe that's kind of coming out as we see, some of the crazy speculative value of Bitcoin deteriorate into kind of a mature transactional phase, which is what people like to think is happening. I think we're got kind of variations of all 4 phases going on at once. Yeah.
I was going to ask, we've been, I think, in my opinion, been seeing this for years in the realm of digital media, and we're starting to see it in the realm of the blockchain technologies. What do you think happens when the laws and the technology become so divergent that the laws are either unenforceable or would be ridiculous to enforce? I mean, what happens when there's, this mountain of legal stuff to stop people from pirating movies, and it doesn't stop anything?
Right. I mean, you're going to have you're going to have some self-sufficient, autonomous Napster analog that's going to be created through this. It's going to be out there giving out copies of this song, to wherever will pay 0.00001 BTC or whatever. There are examples of what you're talking about that go on in all kinds of other contexts. I mean, just look at like our local debate over Uber. Or other kinds of sharing economy services where there's kind of simple versions of conflicts between established legal regimes and much more efficient and compelling models.
I have a really good example before we move on from this. A gentleman was recently questioned, it might have been arrested, for a death threat that a Twitter poetry bot that he wrote made. right? So,
Oh, no.
right. So they found out that it was him because his account was the first follower of this bot account. And it's weird because, right, like, did he make that threat? I mean, he wrote an algorithm that aggregates content from different other Twitter accounts. And the biggest irony of all of this, I think, is the bot was actually making the threat to another Twitter bot. So it was not actually threatening a person.
So wait, who sued him?
No, nobody sued him. He was just there was a death threat made on Twitter, right, and that got reported through the Twitter anonymous reporting systems. And so the UK police were like, so who do we who is being threatened here? Is there actually a threat? Like they still haven't quite figured out.
Right? Is there? Yeah.
It might be the first example of robot on robot threat and violence.
Right. I mean, the only real law that's out there on this stuff is like speculative legal theory about how we will regulate autonomous robots.
So
there's like actual law professors who've done stuff on this. But I think to your important question, what happens is, at some point, kind of network logic and network culture, and the sort of disintermediation and the distribution of a lot of established things starts to infect the political system, which itself finds its kind of pyramidical mode of organization to be obsolete, because the regulators on like this stuff, they struggle to figure out what to do when there's no there.
Can I point out, though, that Bitcoin actually provides a solution to the piracy issue, in the sense that the right now piracy occurs because there's enough benefit to just download a movie that people kind of participate in the system and allow movies to propagate through everywhere. And so there is no one trying to get Bitcoin, and if somebody even wanted to try to get Bitcoin for pirated movies, no one would pay it, because why would you pay a criminal for something you can get for free? We hardly pay the people that own it to get it. But now, on the other hand, with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, you can make a person-to-person exchange and not be killed by the 30 cents transaction fee and the big, all the heavy weight of financial institutions. So you can actually distribute content for a reasonable cost that people would rather pay than be criminals. I mean, honestly,
A lot of criminals do use Bitcoin, and pirate groups do too, and piracy BBS. Like
no organizations. Every organization, even the guy that did the locker, got caught out in Russia, because eventually, if you try to extract too much money out of an organization, your organization becomes visible, and the fact that it isn't completely anonymous means that an organization will get caught. Organizations always have stupid people in them.
That doesn't stop
and
ISIS.
reasonable prices.
They take Bitcoin.
Well, ISIS doesn't.
I feel like
I think they do.
Huh?
They do take Bitcoin.
Are they taking Bitcoin now?
They're on Twitter.
How much are they taking?
I don't know.
Well, see, that's you can't.
Let's get back to your anonymity question, which is how do you anonymize Bitcoin?
research.
And you,
Yeah.
you do. You have tumblers, and you transfer. You split it into a bunch of little Bitcoins and transfer to different accounts. People can't follow it, so you can try to anonymize it.
So it's like
And there's some
so
zero
like what people
knowledge.
do with shell companies nowadays. It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
and legal structures now they make it hard. It's not impossible.
Right.
It's just hard.
Yeah, but it's the bigger you are, the more money you have, the harder it is for you to anonymize it, because you have to, until the whole world is on Bitcoin, a large organization right now sitting on Bitcoin is just completely transparent, because you just can't anonymize a lot of money.
When will that be?
Bitcoin will take over the world in 2022.
Wait, what's your guess, Chris?
He's still on the crypto anarcho-libertarian phase.
Yeah.
What's your guess, Chris?
I think this is like a 20-year thing and beyond. I mean, this is like, and it goes on in parallel with a lot of other things. I think that, I think the smart contract, I mean, the disruption of the established payment system is once you strip, I mean, Walmart definitely wants ways to strip, the interchange fees, they're taking 1 to 3% out of every transaction at the register there. So the immediate economic impetus to grab onto that is strong. And the smart contracts, so for certain applications, where like for gambling, like P2P smart contracts, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. or for derivatives and things like that. I think that's like immediate. The kind of like far out stuff I'm talking about here, where it sort of more deeply embeds itself, depends on like how fast we have, smart property and other things like that. But in some respects, it might happen faster than we think.
Well, the IoT pedal is to the metal right now, right? And so that's already going to put the capability to smart control a lot of different devices and property closer in the future, right?
There was a great article, I had to brag, great article about Factum solves arguments between dishwashers. You can go search that up. The idea is if your garbage disposal keeps telling the dishwasher it's going to need a lot of power, but it fails to use that power, eventually the dishwasher needs to know that that's what that the garbage disposal has been doing that, and it needs to shut it down. And then other devices that come in need to know that reputation to act effectively, otherwise they're just fooled for a long period of time before they realize, oh, that's what's happening. So Factum provides a mechanism to put data on the blockchain. You can hash it or encrypt it in ways that make it private for the household, but allow all the applications to talk to each other and reveal information to other vendors to provide services into the household. It's the whole Internet of Things. Basically, all decisions are based on prior knowledge or the range. You're either using prior knowledge or you're in. The Internet of Things cannot work unless there's knowledge that those things can interchange, and they can't be private unless that knowledge is distributed, so that it's only handed to the devices that matter. And so that's what Factum is trying to do.
Just curious, is anyone aware of precedents of IoT companies working with cryptocurrency tech or blockchain tech?
Well, IBM.
Like IBM is working on
They
this.
forked Ethereum.
They've already.
Maybe Ripple
made a copy of it
they
for
certainly
themselves.
did.
Pretty sure they're doing it courteous thing.
You have to make a copy of these early technologies because they will go continue developing, and we've already had experience with this. If you are using somebody's code and they keep developing, then they develop away from you and suddenly your code doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you fork it and you use that while you're in your exploratory phase until they become real and you become real, and then you can.
Big Blue is watching you.
I just have a question maybe for Chris or anyone in the room. If anyone's read the sidechains paper for the blockchain, there's a whole bunch of Bitcoin wizards doing a sidechain startup.
Like another fork.
Maybe explain what sidechains are.
Brian read it and understands it.
Schism.
I read it and don't.
Okay.
You want to take a shot at it, Brian?
I can try. Okay, so there are 3 phases of sidechains.
So what is it for?
Okay, so sidechains are to move value off the Bitcoin blockchain. And so there's a lot of fundamental things baked into Bitcoin that probably aren't going to change. And it'd be nice to to be able to take your Bitcoins, move them to another chain, and those can move around using their own rules. They can move faster, lower transaction fees.
You're talking about to Litecoin or something like that? To some other chain?
So it would emulate the features of Litecoin, but it would be backed by Bitcoin itself. And so it could follow the rules of the sidechain. And then, once you're done with that, you can destroy them on the sidechain, and then they reappear in Bitcoin, and then you can sell it to the Winklevoss.
So it's
Winklevoss on Bitcoin.
So it's pegging.
Is that your take on it?
Yeah, it's a two-way peg.
But
Two-way
it's
peg.
also a hard fork from the existing Bitcoin blockchain that they're going to have to do in about a year from now. Greg Maxwell and others involved with Blockchain. They are core Bitcoin devs, and they are moving forward with that process. So they raised $22 million earlier, or 2014.
So there are 3 different generations of sidechains. So the first generation is threshold multisig. So this goes back to the 3 people need to agree before the money moves. And so you basically take your Bitcoins, you give it to an account that has 3 people that need to sign off on it before it can move back, and then it can follow the rules of whatever sidechain that they are watching. And then if those three people agree that the money can move back, then they will all agree, and if all three of them agree, but now you have a centralized point of control. And if they don't like you for some reason, then you don't get your money. Generation 2 sidechains are, so Generation 1 is possible today. Generation 2 requires a hard fork with Bitcoin, and it basically says the mining hash power. So there's lots of people who are expending electricity to set policy in Bitcoin. They would also set policy on these sidechains, and to have the money move back from the sidechain back to Bitcoin, there needs to be proof that electricity was burned on the sidechain. And if electricity was burned, then probably it's done right. But this also has the nasty effect. So in Bitcoin, the miners cannot steal your money. However, in Generation 2 sidechain, they can steal your money, which is a fair problem.
But if the other miners, recognize that there's a theft in a Bitcoin block, then they can refuse to build on top of it, in which case that block gets thrown away and thus your money isn't stolen. And so the idea behind sidechains is that there's enough eyes looking, at least on the dominant sidechains, that nobody could effectively steal the money because there's too many people looking at it. And miners listen to each other a lot. So when one of them starts yelling, then they can react. So that's the theory. I just want to mitigate the one part about this.
Refuse to mine your transactions.
What's that?
They can also refuse to mine your transactions.
Yes, miners can refuse, but if another miner got it, and it gets very complicated, that's another hour to talk about.
And then there's Generation 3, which is the bleeding edge of mathematics and computer science, where you basically create a cryptographic proof that an arbitrary computer program was run. And so it's a very small piece of data that can represent a proof that a very long, complex computer program ran. And you can basically, that computer program could be validating the rules of that sidechain. And in order to get the money out from that, you need to present this proof, which is easy to verify, but the program needs to run.
And it provides the conclusion. It's the proof plus the conclusion.
So they use like an HBAC on the data performed?
Zero knowledge proofs. So ZK snarks is what you might.
Speaking of time, I just did you have a comment on?
I was going to say, I mean, if you go read the fascinating prospectus for the Winklevoss Bitcoin Trust, which is on the SEC's Edgar database, they have, this is kind of stuff lawyers love to read on this, they have the lengthy discussion of all the risk factors of, like everything that could go wrong with our investment fund, our Bitcoin denominated investment fund. And they have a lengthy discussion there about forks and, sort of various permutations and possible schisms in the network. And so as you think about this stuff, I think as you see more and more big chunks of investment capital moving into this space, it's important to think about, or corporate capital. I mean, if IBM is, emulating particular chains to influence all of these outcomes, and for better or for worse.
So I want to do something a little bit different from our previous meetups here. We have a lot of folks in the room here, a lot of knowledge in various areas, and I want to give you all a chance to sort of mix organically into smaller discussions on some of these topics where you feel that you have some unanswered questions. Before we wrap up, I want to do two more things, maybe three more things. First, another hand for Chris for being here. I need to read about the IBM fork a lot because that just blew my mind.
Yeah,
a
me
little
too.
bit. Second, if any of y'all have announcements for meetups or discussions relevant to this topic tonight, now's the chance to kind of announce those. So we get the Texas Bitcoin Conference one more time. When's that happening?
We have the Texas Bitcoin Conference on the weekend of the 28th and 29th of March. I also run a meetup at the FACM offices at the head of OPAC. It's right next to the Luby's. It's one. Do you remember the address?
It's one of the meetup groups on Meetup.
Yeah, we're one of the meetups groups on Meetup.com. You can find the address there.
Cool.
Austin Bitcoin Meetup. And I don't think that I have anything else. I think that's it.
Who else?
Yeah. So, well, first I would like to ask a question, and it's addressed to the crowd. So, how many of us here own Bitcoin? Okay. Awesome. That's good to see. How many of you guys have been curious on Bitcoin and gone out to seek education on this?
Everybody.
1 point.
All right. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I just got back from visiting the San Antonio community, learned a little bit about them, and they have this huge initiative where the meetup organizers are looking to educate San Antonio. They call it the San Antonio Crypto Network. So I'm just curious about where Austin is at. Also, we have multiple meetups in town. We have one on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. at Brave New Books.
Who are you and who's we? Sorry.
Community, I would say.
Okay.
My name is Alberto Mata. I'm a local entrepreneur.
In Austin or San Antonio?
In Austin.
Okay.
Co-founder of a company called Satoshi Talent. We've identified a huge need for human capital in the industry as it's growing. Entrepreneurs get excited, they jump in, make a bunch of noise, raise a bunch of capital, and then who's going to build it? So we need to start attracting talent and bringing developers, and so that's what we're doing at Satoshi Talent. So I've been plugged into the community for about 4 or 5 months, and just wanted to tell you guys about the meetups that we have. So on Sunday nights, 7 p.m., Brave New Books. Monday nights, 7 p.m., Brave New Books. Tuesday nights, we have the FACM offices, 7 p.m. as well. And Thursday nights, we have meetups at Satoshi Square, Chacon Collective. So it's on Chacon and 2nd, also at 7 p.m., get together and then go and have drinks. They're all kind of different groups. Sunday nights, we talk a little more get more the ideological perspective of Bitcoin and sort of this long-term vision. On Mondays, it's a little more on Austrian economics and cryptoeconomics, more of a learning kind of vibe. And on Tuesdays, we have more of an entrepreneur business perspective, how do we commercialize the blockchain, what's if the price has been fluctuating or if there's news, that kind of conversation. On Thursdays, we have more of the younger generation of entrepreneurs, 1, 2, 3, 4X entrepreneurs that are launching their first businesses and ventures in the Bitcoin space. There's just so many ideas brewing on Thursdays and more a younger crowd. So
Hey, you didn't mention Dogecoin.
Dogecoin meetup is also on Thursdays right after the meetup at Satoshi Square.
Oh.
So that was the part where I said we go out for drinks. That's Dogecoin.
Sounds about right.
Mini beer. Much happier. So is there a one-stop touch point for all of that folks could go to?
You can email me.
Meetup.com.
You can see that here.
Meetup.com for sure.
Any other announcements before we? Yeah.
Sure. I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Andrew White. I just moved here this week from San Francisco, and
Welcome.
my company is called 1 Million Gateways, and we primarily do cryptocurrency consulting services. So that can mean building new exchanges, new currencies, Bitcoin 2.0 stuff. We're launching a couple new platforms soon, including smart contracts and true anonymous layer stuff that's coming out. So it's kind of great to be here and be able to see everything that everyone's doing.
Welcome to Austin. Yeah.
Not always as cold.
No, this is a weird day. And so I'd like to thank all of y'all for being here. If you want to follow EFF-Austin, we're at EFF-Austin.org, EFF-Austin on Twitter, hashtags, all that. Join our Discuss list if you go to the website. And of course, our meetup group on meetup.com to find out about our upcoming meetups. We are going to have a meetup during South by Southwest. and we have a limited number of spots available for that. That'll actually be in here. We haven't quite precisely worked out how we're going to invite folks to that, since it will be limited. But if you join the discuss list, follow us on the website and on Twitter, we should have an announcement about that pretty soon. So
Just the blockchain.
Yeah,
Use the blockchain.
Yeah, we'll use the blockchain to make it. Everybody get on Twister, and it will only be announced on the Twister distributed Twitter platform that runs on its own blockchain. Sorry, that was a really obscure reference. I do want to invite Mark up to take us out before we do the group discussion. He has written a poem called Blockchain Leviathan during this meetup that he reviewed for the first time.
Please indulge me. I know poetry sucks, but I'm so inspired by your science fiction concept of the blockchain Leviathan and all the conversation here, so I just put it into a poem for now. And this is really, I moved here from San Francisco a few weeks ago, and I always see that there's, in technology, people are always rah, go, and I feel like there's, oh yeah, don't record it though, turn it off. Sorry, this is the first phone, don't tell the internet.
Yeah, you're off camera.
If
you stand there, Mark, you're off camera, by the way.
Oh, great.
Just stay right there.
This is for whatever the opposite, this comes from a space of doing whatever the opposite of cheerleading is. All right, so it's a little bit of like a s'more with a harsh mellow on it. It's a harsh mellow a little bit. Blockchain Leviathan. The blockchain is so cool, but it's still a chain looking for slaves. Capital slave master. So sign up now. Scan this QR code to be my slave. The Leviathan needs slaves to build bigger cages and longer chains. Oh, we love to build. We love to make. We are makers after all. Like the Germans love to interrogate each other. We geeks love to help capital escape the earthly bounds of labor. And according to the gospel of Newspeak, the blockchain will set us free. Finally, laws will be free from human ambiguity. Leniency and mercy will be factored out as mediation takes command. And thank God for the blockchain. I can't wait until DRM is sentient, right? We used to be thieves, but they stole stealing from us. And capital uses the blockchain to enforce its rights and its wrongs. Property rights and property wrongs, digital wrongs management. Because code is law, but code is not justice. And socioeconomic life is not life. It's a glimpse of life through the lens of your wallet. And if we remove all sovereigns, money will still be our sovereign, and King Abacus will never abdicate his throne. But we have faith in the coin and the fiat jihad, death to fiat. As pedophiles and terrorists sit back and wait for Bitcoin to be truly anonymous, and sea levels rise as electricity is converted into the coin, the Leviathan laughs, an obscene chuckle as we chug all the latest internet Kool-Aid without even reading the label. There's no label, it's open source. Nobody's gotten around to writing documentation yet. Blockchain Kool-Aid, we swallow it whole as the blockchain Leviathan swallows our friends, our families, our minds. We keep feeding it, thirsty for its freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of human involvement in digital affairs. Freedom for the blockchain Leviathan to keep feeding on this real world, trapping our philosophies and feelings in bonsai cage prisons. We are converted into numbers. We are cannibalized by markets. Humanity is refactored to less than zero, and this real world winnows into an asymptotic toothpick for the burping blockchain Leviathan.
Yeah. Who's the town? Are you looking for it? Feel free to mix and mingle, head out if you need to, but thank you all again for coming.
All right, thank you.